James Reynolds looked around the cold, gray courtroom as he was led inside. His hands were tied behind his back with handcuffs, and his clothes were dirty and torn. He smelled of sweat and the street. His hair was messy, and a long beard covered his tired face. The people sitting in the courtroom stared at him, but no one said a word. Some looked away quickly, not wanting to see what his life had become. James was a homeless man now, but that wasn't always the case. Years ago, he had been a soldier, a brave man who fought for his country, but that was a long time ago. Today, he was here because the police caught him sleeping in an empty building. They said he was trespassing. They also accused him of stealing some food from a store nearby. Nothing serious, but still against the law. The public defender assigned to James was a young lawyer who barely knew anything about his case. He looked nervous and shuffled his papers. The courtroom was almost empty except for the judge, the prosecutor, a few court officers, and a small group of people who had come for other cases. No one paid much attention. It seemed like just another day of routine work for everyone there. James sat quietly in the defendant's chair. His eyes were tired, but they looked calm. He wasn't angry or scared. Maybe he was too tired for that. His mind was somewhere else, far from the courtroom walls. He thought about the streets he had slept on the night before, the cold wind that bit at his skin, and the hunger he felt every day. But most of all, he thought about the past, about the time when his life was different. The judge, a man named Harold Winston, looked at the case file in front of him. His face was serious, but he did not show any emotion. He was used to seeing cases like this, people arrested for small crimes because they had nowhere else to go. He glanced at James, the man in front of him, but he didn't say anything. Then, suddenly, something caught his attention. He read the name on the file again. It was familiar. Judge Winston's eyes grew wide for a moment. He read the name slowly. James Reynolds. Something about the name struck a deep chord inside him. He looked up at James again. The courtroom felt quieter. The judge's usual calm was gone, replaced by a strange silence. He wasn't just a judge today. He was a man who remembered something important from the past. James noticed the judge looking at him differently. For the first time, he felt like someone saw him. Not as a homeless criminal, but as a person. He straightened his back a little and waited, unsure of what would happen next. The public defender spoke first. "Your Honor, this is a man who has served his country. He's a veteran," the lawyer said softly, hoping to explain why James might have ended up this way. Judge Winston nodded slowly. "Veteran," he repeated, almost to himself. Then he asked James directly, "Did you serve in the military?" James looked at the judge and answered simply, "Yes, sir, I did. I was in Iraq with the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry." The judge's face changed again. He seemed to struggle with his feelings. The courtroom was still silent. Then the judge said something that surprised everyone. "Private First Class James Reynolds?" His voice was calm but filled with respect. James blinked. "Yes, sir, that's me." Suddenly, Judge Winston stood up from his seat. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, trying to steady himself. Everyone in the courtroom stopped what they were doing. Even the bailiff looked confused. The judge's voice was quiet, but it carried through the room. "You saved my life." No one moved. The silence was so deep that you could hear a pin drop. James stared at the judge, not sure if he heard correctly. "Your Honor?" the public defender asked, breaking the silence. The judge looked down, then back at James. "Yes, many years ago, in a faraway place. You risked your own life to save mine." James' eyes widened. Memories he had tried to forget flooded his mind. The noise of explosions, the cries of wounded soldiers, the dust and smoke of the battlefield. He remembered the fear and the pain, but also the hope and the courage that kept him going. For a moment, the courtroom felt like it disappeared. It was just two men, connected by a story that only they understood. Judge Winston sat back down slowly, his hands shaking a little. "I want to hear your story," he said softly. James nodded, and something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe this day, this moment, could be the beginning of something new. The trial was supposed to be quick, a simple case of trespassing and theft. But it had become much more. It was no longer about a homeless man, in trouble with the law. It was about a forgotten hero, a man who had given everything and was now lost in the streets. As the court session continued, everyone watched quietly. They saw a man who was more than his mistakes and his troubles. They saw a veteran who had once been brave and strong, and for the first time in a long time James felt seen. After James Reynolds returned home from Iraq, life was supposed to get easier. He was finally back in the place he once called home, surrounded by familiar streets, family, and friends. But things didn't go as he expected. The war had changed James deeply, and he soon found himself in a battle he never prepared for, a battle with his own mind and the world around him. At first, when James came back, his family was happy to see him. They welcomed him with open arms and tried to help, but it wasn't easy. James was different now. The war had left marks on his body and soul. He had injuries that took time to heal, but more difficult were the invisible wounds, the memories, the nightmares, and the constant fear that lingered inside him like a shadow. James tried to go back to normal life. He wanted to find a job, reconnect with friends, and live peacefully. But the more he tried, the more he realized things had changed. His body ached from the injuries, and his mind was restless. Sleep was rare, and when it came, it was filled with nightmares of explosions and lost comrades. The war had left James with something called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It was a condition many soldiers faced after seeing and experiencing horrors no one should ever face. PTSD made James scared of loud noises, crowds, and even certain places that reminded him of battle. His heart would race, his hands would shake, and he felt like he was always on edge. Many people didn't understand what James was going through. Some thought he was just being difficult or lazy. Others avoided him because they didn't know how to help. This made James feel even more alone. His family tried their best, but even they struggled to understand the pain he carried every day. James wanted to get help. He visited doctors and counselors, hoping to find relief. But the system was slow and confusing. There were long waiting lists, complicated forms, and many times, no clear answers. James felt frustrated and hopeless. The promises made to veterans sometimes seemed empty. Without steady work or a place to live, James's situation worsened. Bills piled up, and he lost his home. The shelter was full, so he started living on the streets. At first it was just a temporary place to sleep, but days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Life on the streets was harsh. James faced cold nights, hunger, and the constant fear of danger. He struggled to find food and a safe place to rest. People passed him by without noticing or caring. It was as if he had become invisible. But James didn't give up completely. He held on to memories of his time as a soldier, the pride he felt wearing the uniform, the friends he made, and the lives he saved. Those memories were like a small flame inside him, keeping hope alive. Still, the longer he stayed homeless, the harder it was to stay hopeful. His health declined, and the wounds inside his mind grew deeper. James began to isolate himself, avoiding others out of shame and pain. He stopped going to places where he might find help because he feared rejection. One day, James found himself in trouble with the law. It was a small mistake, but it landed him in court. He didn't want to be there. He just wanted a chance to start over, to be seen not as a homeless man or a criminal, but as a person. As James sat in the courtroom, he felt the weight of years of struggle pressing down on him. But what happened next would change everything. James Reynolds had not always been the tired, homeless man standing in that courtroom. Many years before, he was a young soldier, full of hope and courage, serving his country in a dangerous place far from home. That place was Iraq. Back then, James was part of the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry. He wasn't just any soldier, he was a combat medic. His job was to save lives. When soldiers were hurt in battle, it was James who ran to help them, even when bullets flew and bombs exploded all around. The memory of that time came back to him clearly. He could see the dusty streets and burning buildings. The hot sun beat down on his helmet, and the air was thick with smoke and noise. The sounds of war were all around. The sharp cracks of gunfire, the distant explosions, and the cries of soldiers in pain. One particular day stood out in James' mind. It was a day that would change his life forever. James and his unit were on a dangerous mission in a small town. They were searching for enemy fighters who hid among the civilians. The streets were narrow and filled with people, making it hard to tell friend from foe. The tension was high, and everyone knew that one wrong move could cost lives. Suddenly, a powerful explosion ripped through the air. A roadside bomb, hidden beneath the dusty road, had detonated right near James and his comrades. The blast threw them to the ground. Dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to see. James could hear the screams of the wounded. Without hesitation, James sprang into action. His training as a medic kicked in. He crawled through the dirt, looking for soldiers who needed help. He found one man lying badly hurt, bleeding and unconscious. It was a dangerous place to be, but James didn't hesitate. He picked up the man, dragging him to safety, all while bullets whizzed past him. That man was none other than Harold Winston, the same man who was now the judge in the courtroom where James sat. James worked fast, doing everything he could to stop the bleeding and keep the man alive. The explosion had shaken them both, but James's quick actions saved Winston's life that day. After the attack, James was injured himself. The blast left him with serious wounds and a head injury that changed everything. When he returned home, James faced new battles, this time inside his own mind. The memories of war haunted him. The sounds of explosions echoed in his ears at night. He could not forget the faces of the friends he had lost. He felt trapped in a world of fear and sadness. Doctors said he had post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It was a condition many soldiers suffered from after war, but at that time help was hard to find. Instead of healing, James's life slowly fell apart. The pain inside made it difficult to hold a job, keep a home, or trust others. His injuries made everyday life a struggle. The government promised care for veterans, but James found it nearly impossible to get the help he needed. The system was slow, and the waiting lines were long. Over time, James lost everything. He ended up on the streets, homeless and alone. His uniform was gone, replaced by tattered clothes. His medals and memories were hidden deep inside, buried beneath the weight of his struggles. Meanwhile, the man whose life James had saved, Harold Winston, returned to the United States with a new purpose. He worked hard, studying law and becoming a judge. He thought often of the young medic who had risked everything for him. Yet he never knew what happened to James after the war. Now, years later, fate had brought them back together in a courtroom. Not as soldier and medic, but as judge and defendant. As James sat in that courtroom, the memories of the battlefield came flooding back. The pain, the fear, and the bravery. The war had shaped him, but it had also broken him. And yet, even in the darkest moments, there was a spark of hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, this meeting could be a chance to heal. The courtroom remained silent after Judge Winston stood up and spoke those powerful words. "You saved my life." Everyone in the room could feel the weight of the moment. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. James Reynolds, the homeless veteran, and Judge Harold Winston, the man he had saved years ago in a faraway war, were connected by a bond that few understood. The judge slowly sat back down, rubbing his temples as if to clear his mind. His usual calm and serious judge voice softened, showing the deep respect and emotion he felt inside. For a moment, the courtroom was no longer a place of law and order. It became a room filled with the past, with memories of bravery, sacrifice, and pain. Judge Winston looked at James with new eyes. This was no longer just a man accused of breaking the law. This was a man who had faced dangers that most could never imagine. A man who had saved lives while risking his own. A man who now needed help. The judge quietly asked the lawyers to step aside with him for a private conversation. The room emptied slowly. The few people who had been watching left confused and curious about what was going on. In a small private room just off the courtroom, Judge Winston faced James and the public. "Defender, we cannot treat this case like any other," the judge said firmly. "This man is more than a defendant. He is a hero who has suffered greatly. He deserves a chance to rebuild his life." James listened quietly, surprised and unsure what to say. For years he had felt forgotten, thrown away like many others who served and came home wounded in mind and body. The judge's words felt like a small light in the darkness. The judge explained that instead of sentencing James to jail, he wanted to find a better way to help him. He had contacted a local veteran rehabilitation program, a place that provided care, counseling, and job training for veterans struggling with homelessness, addiction, and mental health. "I want to personally oversee your progress," the judge told James. "This is your chance to get back on your feet." James was hesitant. Trust was hard for him after years of feeling abandoned. He had been let down by many before. But something in the judge's voice gave him hope, a hope that maybe he wasn't alone. Back in the courtroom, Judge Winston officially paused the case, ordering a stay. This meant James would not go to jail that day. Instead, he would be released to enter the rehabilitation program and start the long journey toward healing. News of the unusual case spread quickly. A court transcript leaked, and soon reporters arrived at the courthouse. The story of the homeless veteran and the judge who stood for him captured people's hearts. Newspapers wrote about James, calling him a hero who had fallen through the cracks of a system that failed too many veterans. Donations started to pour in. Kind people offered help: money, food, clothing, and even job offers. Organizations reached out, wanting to support James and others like him. The community, once indifferent, now saw James as a symbol of courage and resilience. Despite the attention, James remained quiet and unsure. Years of pain and rejection made it hard for him to believe that things could really change. He had lived on the streets for so long, feeling invisible and worthless. But deep inside, a small part of him wanted to try. The rehabilitation program was not easy. It demanded discipline, honesty, and facing difficult truths about his past and his struggles. James learned to manage his PTSD and other health issues with the help of doctors and counselors. He attended group therapy sessions, where he met other veterans who understood his pain. The program also helped him find a small apartment and a steady job. James took the work seriously, even when it was hard. For the first time in years, he felt useful and respected. He was no longer just a homeless man. He was a man with a purpose. Throughout this time, Judge Winston stayed in contact. He visited James regularly, offering encouragement and support. The judge did not just see him as a defendant or even a veteran. He saw a friend who deserved dignity and a second chance. Slowly, James began to heal, not just his body, but his heart and spirit. The memories of war were still there, but they no longer controlled his life. He found strength in helping others, who struggled as he once had. James started volunteering with veteran organizations, speaking about his experience and encouraging others to seek help. His story inspired many, showing that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. The community that had once ignored him now cheered him on. Schools invited him to talk to students about courage and resilience. Local businesses offered jobs to veterans. James became a symbol of what was possible when people came together to support each other. But the journey was not without setbacks. Some days were harder than others. The pain and trauma of the past sometimes felt overwhelming. Yet, James faced these challenges with a new determination. He refused to give up. The bond between James and Judge Winston grew stronger. They often met over coffee, sharing stories and hopes for the future. The judge saw in James not just a man who saved his life, but a man who was saving himself. One day, James stood in front of a crowd at the graduation ceremony of the rehabilitation program. His face was clean, his clothes neat, and his eyes bright with hope. Judge Winston sat proudly in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else. James spoke about his journey, from the battlefield to the streets, from despair to hope. He thanked the judge, the program, and the community for believing in him. "I am not the same man who walked into that courtroom," he said. "I am stronger now because of the kindness and support I received." The story of James Reynolds spread beyond the town. People across the country learned about the homeless veteran who found a second chance thanks to the judge who remembered him. But for James, the greatest reward was simple: a new life filled with purpose, respect, and hope. He was no longer invisible. He was seen, heard, and valued. And as he walked past the courthouse, no longer in handcuffs, but with a steady step and a clear mind, James knew he had reclaimed his place in the world. After months of hard work and challenges, James Reynolds was no longer the man who once sat in a courtroom as a homeless defendant. He had been through a long and difficult journey, but now he stood tall, proud, and hopeful. The battle he had fought for years wasn't on a faraway battlefield anymore. It was here, in his own life, as he fought to reclaim his future. James had finished the rehabilitation program. It was a place that had helped him find stability and hope. There, he had learned how to manage his past wounds, both the ones on his body and the ones deep inside his mind. PTSD, depression, and the pain of years on the streets didn't disappear overnight, but James learned to face them head-on. With support from doctors, counselors, and friends, he had taken control of his life again. The day of his graduation from the program was one of the happiest days in James's life. The small room where the ceremony took place was filled with other veterans who had also completed their healing journeys. Families, program staff, and supporters gathered to celebrate these brave men and women who had overcome enormous struggles. Judge Harold Winston sat in the front row, his face glowing with pride. He had been with James every step of the way, visiting him during the program, checking on his progress, and encouraging him to keep moving forward. The judge's presence was more than a symbol. It was a reminder that James was not alone, and that someone believed in him. When it was James's turn to speak, he stood in front of the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He told his story, not just the hardships but the hope that had carried him through. He spoke about the war, the loss, and the dark times on the streets. But most of all, he spoke about second chances and the power of kindness. "I am not the man I was," James said. "I am stronger now because of the support I received. Because someone saw me when I thought no one would." The room erupted in applause. For many, James was more than a graduate. He was a symbol of resilience and the proof that no one should be forgotten. After the ceremony, James and Judge Winston met quietly. James looked at the judge and smiled. "Thank you for believing in me," he said. "Not just in court, but every day since." Judge Winston smiled back. "You saved my life once. Now you're saving yourself." James's new life was not just about healing. It was about giving back. He felt a deep desire to help others who faced the same struggles he had endured. He began volunteering at local veteran centers, sharing his story and offering support. His experience made him a beacon of hope for many. Through his volunteer work, James helped other veterans find resources for housing, jobs, and medical care. He became an advocate for homeless veterans, speaking at community events and working with organizations to improve support systems. One of James' proudest moments came when he helped a young veteran who was on the brink of losing hope. This young man reminded James of himself, lost, broken, and invisible. James' guidance and encouragement helped the young veteran find his way to a rehabilitation program and a new beginning. James also found work with a nonprofit group dedicated to helping homeless veterans. The job gave him purpose and stability. Each day he met people who needed a hand, a kind word, or simply someone to listen. James knew what it was like to feel invisible, and he made sure no one he helped would feel that way. The relationship between James and Judge Winston continued to grow. They met regularly, sometimes just to talk over coffee. They shared stories, laughed, and sometimes spoke about the future. The judge was more than a figure of authority. He was a true friend. One afternoon, as they sat in a small cafe, the judge asked James about his hopes and dreams. James thought for a moment and said, "I want to make sure no other veteran ends up like I did. I want to build a community where we support each other." Judge Winston nodded. "And I will help you in any way I can." Their friendship was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, connections between people can change lives. James often walked past the courthouse where his story had taken a dramatic turn. It no longer felt like a place of judgment and fear. Instead, it was a symbol of second chances and new beginnings. He was no longer a man in handcuffs, but a man who had reclaimed his dignity. The community around James had changed too. People now saw the struggles of veterans and homelessness differently. Local schools invited James to speak about his experiences, teaching young people about courage, kindness, and the importance of helping others. James's story inspired many to volunteer, donate, and advocate for better support systems. His voice helped bring attention to a problem that often went unnoticed: the struggles of veterans after they come home. But James never forgot where he came from. He remembered the nights on the street, the hunger, the fear, and the loneliness. Those memories fueled his passion to keep fighting for change. His work was not easy. Some days were difficult. The weight of his past still lingered, and the fight against stigma and misunderstanding was ongoing. But James faced these challenges with courage and determination. Over time, James became a leader in the veteran community. His experience, honesty, and kindness made him a trusted voice. He helped start programs, raise funds, and create safe spaces for veterans to heal. James often thought about the day he met Judge Winston in court. That moment had changed everything. It was proof that one person's actions could change another person's life forever. Looking back, James felt grateful, not only for the judge's belief in him, but for the chance to prove to himself that he was more than his past. He had found a new family among veterans and supporters who understood him. He had found purpose in helping others. And most importantly, he had found hope. James's story was one of survival, redemption, and the power of second chances. It showed that no matter how far someone falls, they can rise again, with help, kindness, and the courage to try. As James stood outside the courthouse one sunny afternoon, he looked up at the sky and smiled. The road had been long and hard, but he had come home, to himself, to his community, and to a future full of promise.